Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Sprout Social Agency Network. It's actually the Agency Network by Sprout Social now, my bad. We're talking content performance with Jory Greenmark today. I'm your host, Joe Huber. I'm the Customer Community Strategist here at Sprout Social. I'll be guiding you through this today. I'll be moderating and just kind of asking questions to Jory, just basically too about all of the different things around content performance. And we're gonna go through how she's operated with it. One of the things I'd also like for all of you is if you have questions for Jory as we go throughout, there will be a Q&A portion at the end, so please do thread your questions below. We are going to get started here by just letting Jory introduce herself a little bit more. Jory, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jory Mark. I head up content and social media at the Bullseye Strategy Agency. I have a lot of brand side experience prior to joining the agency, and I love being part of the Sprout Network.
Yeah. Well, we love having you. This is so exciting. So we were talking with a couple different people about doing content performance and things like that. And in one of our meetings, we were talking about Jory, and then Jory and I sat down and did a practice session. So I'm actually really excited because she's got a lot of great takeaways. Jory, you ready to rock and roll?
I am ready, yes.
Let's do it. Let's jump into our first question, which is, what is your process for creating strong content?
So as an agency, the most important thing is we want to be accomplishing our clients' business goals. So we always align on the goal first of the content. So whether that's a new product they want to get amplification for, or it's starting conversations for business to business brands, and sometimes it's about thought leadership. So we start with the goal in mind, and then we tend to have a content intake meeting in which we propose a rough, we call it a skeleton calendar. So we're going to do these types of posts on Tuesdays and maybe, Friday thought leadership posts. And once we get alignment, we go ahead and we usually have a much better success rate in terms of approvals that way. If they're aligned with the topics, when we go to use Sprout to route approvals to the client, they're much more likely to have minimal changes if they know in advance what the topics are going to be.
Yeah. So one thing too to kind of talk through is like the calendar and planning in terms of creation. That's a super important part of any type of content. One of the things you mentioned too is that you do use Sprout. If someone didn't, let's say that someone didn't have approval workflows baked into their strategy, do you have any tips for people who are maybe on like a lower plan level, or things that they might be able to do if they don't have access to all the tools?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think you need to have the Sprout approval to still have a really smooth process. I mean, we use Google Docs. There's all different ways you can always PDF your proposed content and email it to them and say, do you have any changes, and allow them to put comments. But I think as long as you start out with alignment on what the overall content is going to be, sometimes having a brand voice kind of agreed upon in advance, then you're going to have minimal back and forth, which is, as we know, what eats up hours in an agency.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And like it's again too, if you are using Sprout and you're not sure exactly what to do with it, you can always talk to your CSM as well, and they'll help you through to kind of like how to use it and leverage some of those things. So those are great tips, great points. Let's jump in here to question 2, which are, what kinds of goals do you typically set?
Again, this is something where we do have the goal at the beginning of, say, a relationship with a brand, wanting to know, is it impressions, is it engagements, is it conversations, even if it's shares, audience size. But I find that engagement is a metric that is the easiest to measure, easiest whether they have an organic only sort of approach or if they do a lot of paid. And really shows that that their customers, that the content resonated. I mean, that's something that you can benchmark and measure. So I personally think that the engagement rate is sort of works for most clients, and that's what we typically will benchmark before we start working with a client, and then we'll show results of it.
Yeah, no, the engagement rate is one of those things where when I worked in social, that was like the very first thing that we looked at, especially early on. Before you can figure anything else out, there's a million different ways to do metrics, right? And so without having some sort of baseline. Like you're just kind of guessing at things. And so seeing, especially what that engagement rate is on either a past campaign that was similar or on a campaign that on which you're currently working, really driving towards those different things. I love that specific metric as a tip, but then also I love it too as a benchmark, as a starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into question 3, which is, how do you measure your content? So you've put your goals into place, you've created the content, we've got everything rocking and rolling. How do we measure it?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but the benchmark before we started working with them, and then how are we growing audiences? How are we growing, the size of the community? How are we growing? How is the engagement rate faring as we're taking approaches that we recommend? So that is ultimately, we do reporting, every month, and we do account for seasonality. I mean, for certain brands, it's going to make sense that holiday shopping season is the perfect time to have a conversation about a gift, and maybe not so much in the summer when everybody's busy and traveling and not shopping. So with the accounting for seasonality, that being said, we will look month to month how things did, and we always try to optimize. If some approach does better than another, we'll go back and in the future we'll do more of what works and less of what didn't.
Yeah, I love that. Obviously it's the idea of benchmarking and knowing where you're at, but then it's also being able to know what didn't work. That's super important. One of the things I will thread in here as well is, you mentioned holidays, and it's around like a specific campaign like holidays. Holidays are coming up. That's a big thing. We have a customer webinar that I'll be moderating next Thursday. I'm going to go ahead and thread that in the comments as well. It's for customers only, so if you're not a customer, no worries. You can always talk to a salesperson about what that looks like. But if you're not a customer, or if you are a customer, you can definitely check that out. And we're going to do a ton of great stuff. That'll be with Tazi Flory and Becca Toth from our customer success team, and I'll be moderating. I'll put that in there as well. And I don't think it's so one of the things you said was broken, like sounding like a broken record. And it's like the idea of a lot of content is it's that repetition, and it's getting into like the flow of things. And so for you set up so much content for so many different customers, and you're always looking at how can we make this as effective as possible. And for you, a lot of times I'm sure customers come to you without a baseline, and so you're setting yourself up for that success, so that way you can get to those numbers and get to the metrics that customers are hoping to get to. So I don't think it's a broken record. I think it's just really astute observations that help us get through.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Awesome. All right, question 4, which is around those customer things, and it's, how do you get clarity around goals with your customers and set proper expectations for what defines success? Because I think this is something that eludes a lot of people, is how do we get customers to look at it even?
Yeah, I think that's really important. You can run into sort of pie in the sky aspirations otherwise, where a client thinks that you're going to make them quote unquote go viral, from the moment they start working with you. So I do think giving them some idea of maybe an industry benchmark, for example, and also the role that promotion, putting media dollars has in success. I know it's less than 1% right now. Most retailers are at under 1% for organic engagement rate when there's no paid support. That's a pretty low number. A lot of it has to do with sort of the Facebook zero. So I think educating customers on what to expect, so that when you tell them that their organic content had a 4% engagement rate, they're blown away rather than wondering why it's not 100% engagement rate.
Mm-hmm. That I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. The 100% the word that I look to is educating customers. And I've worked in customer success, and so obviously, like, without being at an agency, we're still doing those similar things, and having done consulting work, you're still doing those things as well about, like, it's not 100%, like, you're not going to get 100% engagement rate, and kind of walking people through what are those realistic numbers, because sometimes people walk into it and they say, well, 50%, and be like, that would be amazing if that was your engagement percentage, and just kind of like what those numbers mean, and taking it through, especially for somebody who's not in social media. So, all right, we've got one last question here. I don't see any questions that have come through just yet on the on the live itself, which is not a big deal. We generally don't have a ton of questions for the Q&A. But the last question that we have, unless someone asks another question, is what is the strongest content campaign that you've ever built?
I am really proud of a campaign I did prior to joining this agency when I headed up social media at Kroger. We had something for the holidays, speaking of the holidays, called the Cheer Challenge. And the goal was customer engagement. And what we did was we came up with a bunch of really fun challenges to get people to they share a photo of them in their favorite ugly Christmas sweater in the freezer aisle, and then tag us. And there were opportunities to win and get little prizes along the way every time they did that. And we our best part of that campaign was a challenge to show their pet's naughty or nice moment, and we got a lot of cats tangled in Christmas trees. So we got some really fun content that all of the customers were sort of having conversations about. And it was a great way to really spread cheer for the holidays.
Yeah, I love that, and I love it because I love dogs, and so I'm constantly asking people for dog pics. Also, I'm sorry, I thought that this background was working with me here, and now it's like I'm super dark. So I apologize to everybody watching that if you can't see my face, maybe it's better that way. The naughty and nice pets, I love the idea too of with social, and one of the things I know that we've talked about during our planning session too is like thinking of ways, like things that work on other campaigns and bringing them into your current campaigns. And so like the for the pets, like pets work with it also now. I just got super bright. I'm all over the place with this. But it's that idea of finding things that have worked in other campaigns and then bringing that into your current campaigns as well, and thinking about like, okay, like you said, like thinking about your benchmarks and going back to looking at other things from your past and then thinking about how you can implement that into your current campaigns and the things that you're planning. I love those things.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to share? We don't have any other questions, so but is there anything else that you'd like, any tips, tricks, things like that for content performance that you'd like to share and pass along?
I would just say what you had just said really rung true to me, to take things that worked in the past and apply them as they make sense and are relevant to your current clients. I mean, that's one thing that I really enjoy about being at an agency. I think it's a unique benefit that brands don't necessarily get to benefit from, is that, here we are and we know what was a home run for one client, maybe tweaking it somewhat, keeping in mind their different audiences and needs, will be a home run for someone else. So I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jory. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to everybody who watched live. I know that there wasn't a ton of you watching live, but if you do have questions and you're watching this later, feel free to comment below and let us know what questions you have for Jory about content management, what questions you have for us as well about anything like that. If you have any ideas for future lives that you'd like to see as well, please go ahead and comment, let us know, and if you have dog pics, throw those in there too. Thanks so much, everybody.